The deck is pitching. Not the gentle roll of calm seas, but the violent, unpredictable heave of a carrier in rough Pacific water. Lieutenant Colonel James Harold Doolittle can feel it through the rudder pedals, through the control column, through every rivet in this B-25B Mitchell bomber that was never designed to be here. His co-pilot, Lieutenant Richard Cole, has both hands on the throttles, holding them full forward against the stops. The engines are screaming. 16,000 pounds of airplane, fuel, and ordnance sits at the edge of USS Hornet's flight deck. And ahead, barely 467 feet of painted wood before the bow drops away into empty air and cold ocean. They are 75 feet short of the minimum takeoff distance. Doolittle's eyes are locked on the deck officer, a young ensign whose checkered flag is whipping in the 30-knot wind. The carrier is climbing up the face of a swell. Timing is everything. Launch at the crest, and the deck will drop away beneath them just as the wheels leave the wood. A free gift of altitude, maybe 10 feet, maybe the difference between flying and drowning. Launch in the trough, and the nose will drop into the back of the next wave. The engines are at 46 inches of manifold pressure, beyond red line. The cylinders won't take this abuse for long. Doolittle can smell the heat, the oil, the high-octane fuel vapors mixing with salt spray. His left hand rests on the control column. His right hand is ready to pull the flap lever the instant the wheels break contact. The flag drops. Doolittle releases the brakes. But we're getting ahead of ourselves. Before we examine the technical and tactical decisions that led to this moment, to 80 men launching 16 fully loaded medium bombers from a flight deck that should have killed them all, please subscribe to the channel. And I want to know, where are you listening from today? Leave a comment below. I read every single one. Whether you're a veteran, an engineer, or simply someone who believes these stories need to be preserved, your presence here matters. Now, let's go back to the beginning. To understand why 80 Army Air Force's crewmen found themselves on the deck of a Navy carrier 650 nautical miles from the coast of Japan, we need to understand the desperation of early 1942. December 7, 1941, Pearl Harbor. The Imperial Japanese Navy had demonstrated in one catastrophic morning that the United States Pacific Fleet could be crippled at anchor. January 1942, Wake Island falls, Guam falls. The Philippines are collapsing, Hong Kong is gone. Singapore will fall in February. The Japanese advance seems unstoppable, an empire expanding at a rate unprecedented in modern warfare. American morale is shattered. The nation that had believed itself protected by two oceans now understands it is vulnerable. President Franklin Roosevelt needs something, anything, to prove to the American people and to the Japanese high command that the United States can strike back, that American bombers can reach the home islands, that Tokyo itself is not safe. The problem is simple and apparently insurmountable. There is no American base within striking distance of Japan. The Army Air Force's newest medium bombers, the B-25 Mitchell and the B-26 Marauder, have a combat radius of roughly 1,200 miles. The closest American-held territory is well over 2,000 miles from Tokyo. Long-range heavy bombers like the B-17 Flying Fortress lack the range to strike and return. Forward bases don't exist. Island hopping hasn't begun. Submarine-launched aircraft are a fantasy of limited payload. The solution, when it comes, seems equally impossible. Captain Francis Lowe, a submarine officer on Admiral Ernest King's staff, is touring Naval Air Station Norfolk in January 1942 when he watches Navy bombers practicing carrier takeoffs on a runway painted with a flight deck outline. A thought forms. A ridiculous thought. Army bombers are larger than anything the Navy operates. But what if? Lowe takes the idea to Admiral King. King takes it to General Henry Hap, Arnold, commanding general of the Army Air Forces. Arnold assigns the problem to Lieutenant Colonel James H. Doolittle. James Harold Doolittle is, by April 1942, already a legend in American aviation. He earned his doctorate in aeronautical engineering from MIT in 1925. He performed the first outside loop in 1927. He won the Schneider Trophy race in 1925. He made the first successful instrument flight takeoff to landing entirely on instruments in 1929. He set the world landplane speed record in 1932. He's a test pilot, an engineer, a scientist, and a racing champion. He's also 35 years old and has been pushing, begging, demanding a combat assignment since the war began. Arnold gives him one, a mission that should be impossible. Take Army medium bombers, launch them from a Navy carrier, bomb Tokyo, and somehow make it to friendly airfields in China. The survival rate, calculated honestly, is perhaps 30%. The chance of the mission succeeding at all is worse. Doolittle accepts immediately. Eglin Field, Florida. February 1942. Doolittle has selected the B-25B Mitchell for this mission over the B-26 Marauder for one critical reason: wing loading. The Mitchell has a lower wing loading, the ratio of aircraft weight to wing area, which means it can theoretically become airborne at a lower speed. This matters when your runway is shorter than any runway should be. The North American B-25B Mitchell is a remarkable aircraft. It's powered by two Wright R-2609 double Cyclone 14-cylinder radial engines, each producing 1,700 horsepower. Empty weight, 19,000 pounds. Maximum takeoff weight, 27,000 pounds, though that's about to be exceeded dramatically. Wingspan, 67 feet, 10 inches. Length, 52 feet, 11 inches. It was designed to take off from runways of at least 3,000 feet. USS Hornet's flight deck is 809 feet long, and the bombers will be spotted starting at the 467-foot mark because fighters and other aircraft occupy the aft deck. The mathematics don't work. But mathematics can be bent if you're willing to modify everything. Lieutenant Henry Miller, a Navy aviator assigned to Eglin Field, begins testing whether a B-25 can actually take off in under 500 feet. The first attempts are not encouraging. The Mitchell is heavy. Medium bombers were never designed for carrier operations. The wing loading, even with the Mitchell's relatively large wing area, produces a stall speed far higher than any Navy aircraft operating from carriers. But Doolittle and Miller begin making modifications. Systematic, calculated. Every pound matters. Every foot of takeoff roll matters. First, remove all unnecessary weight. The ventral turret, the belly gun turret, comes out. It weighs 600 pounds and hangs below the fuselage like a tumor of drag. Gone. The liaison radio set removed. Unnecessary liaison equipment removed. One of the two. 50 caliber machine guns in the tail, removed to save weight and ammunition. The Norden bomb sight, the top secret precision bomb sight that American crews are ordered to destroy rather than let fall into enemy hands, is removed and replaced with a simple 20-cent Mark Twain sight fabricated from aluminum. Basically a calibrated stick that the bombardier looks down. It's crude, but it weighs almost nothing. Second, increase fuel capacity. The B-25B normally carries 670 gallons of fuel in internal tanks. For this mission, Doolittle's engineers install additional fuel tanks in the bomb bay, in the crawlway, anywhere they can fit a bladder. Total fuel capacity, 1,141 gallons. This gives the Mitchell a theoretical range of 400 nautical miles, enough to reach Tokyo from 600 miles out and continue to airfields in China. Assuming everything goes perfectly, assuming no headwinds, assuming no combat. Assumptions that are never safe in war. Third, modify the engines for short field takeoff. The carburetors are adjusted to provide the richest possible fuel mixture on takeoff, sacrificing fuel efficiency for maximum power. The engines will be operated beyond their rated limits, 46 inches of manifold pressure versus the standard 41 inches. This will cause accelerated wear, possible detonation, and cylinder damage. but the engines only need to survive long enough to clear the bow of the carrier. After that, they can be throttled back to normal cruise settings. Fourth, install defensive armament that doesn't exist. The B-25B's tail has been stripped of one gun to save weight, but the Japanese can't know that. 2 broomsticks painted black are installed in the tail to simulate machine guns. It's a bluff. A prayer that Japanese fighters will respect the apparent armament enough to maintain distance. The test flights at Eglin prove it's possible. Barely. Lieutenant Miller gets a B-25 airborne in 467 feet under controlled conditions, maximum power, full flaps, light fuel load, no ordnance, calm wind, level runway. But even this is marginal. The Mitchell breaks ground with perhaps 5 knots above stall speed. Any loss of power, any gust of wind, any pilot error, and the bomber will settle back to the runway or, worse, mush off the end and into the water. Now multiply that challenge by 16. 16 bombers, each loaded far beyond normal takeoff weight. 16 crews who are Army, not Navy, and have never operated from a carrier. Launch them from a pitching deck in the middle of the Pacific, in combat conditions, with no possibility of abort or go-around. If a bomber can't take off, it will roll off the bow and sink. If it takes off but can't climb, it will hit the water. If it loses an engine on departure, there's no altitude to recover. It will crash. And every bomber behind it will be trapped on deck, unable to launch, turning USS Hornet into a floating bomb. The volunteers are called for in February 1942. Doolittle doesn't explain the mission. He can't. It's classified beyond top secret. He simply asks for crews willing to fly a mission that is dangerous, important, and interesting. Every crew in the 17th Bombardment Group volunteers. Doolittle selects 24 crews and begins training. They practice short-field takeoffs, again and again. They practice low-level navigation over water. They practice formation flying at 50 feet above the Gulf of Mexico. They practice fuel management, calculating endurance down to the minute. They do not practice carrier landings because the B-25 cannot land on a carrier. This is a one-way trip. Land in China or ditch in the ocean. Those are the only options. March 31st, 1942. San Francisco Bay. USS Hornet, a Yorktown-class aircraft carrier commissioned less than 6 months ago, sits at Alameda Naval Air Station. On her flight deck, clearly visible to anyone watching from shore, sit 16 B-25B Mitchell bombers. There's no hiding them. The Army bombers dwarf the Navy fighters. Their twin tails rise above the carrier's island. Their wings overhang the deck edge. Civilians on shore watch in confusion. Army bombers on a Navy carrier? It makes no sense. The Japanese consulate in San Francisco makes no sense of it either, but they report it. Tokyo receives word that American bombers have been loaded onto a carrier. The assumption is that they're being ferried somewhere, perhaps to Australia, perhaps to Hawaii. The idea that they might be launched to bomb Japan is considered and dismissed. Medium bombers cannot take off from a carrier deck. The physics don't allow it. It's impossible. Doolittle has selected 16 crews from the 24 trained, 80 men. The 16th bomber is a late addition, squeezed onto the deck at the last possible moment. Every airplane will be needed. Every bomb will matter. The crews are finally briefed on the mission. They will launch from the carrier approximately 400 nautical miles from Japan, far enough to avoid detection, close enough for the bombers to reach China afterward. They will fly in at low altitude to avoid radar detection, climb to 1,500 feet, for the bomb run strike military and industrial targets in Tokyo, Yokohama, Osaka, Kobe, and Nagoya. Then continue west to airfields in China, where Chinese nationalist forces will provide fuel and assistance. From there, they'll be evacuated back to friendly territory. It's a plan that requires everything to go right. The carrier must approach to within 400 miles without being detected. The weather must cooperate. The bombers must launch successfully. The targets must be found. The aircraft must have enough fuel to reach China. The Chinese airfields must have radio homing beacons operating so the bombers can find them in the dark, because by the time they reach China, it will be night. Every link in this chain must hold. One crew drops out. The pilot is ill. Doolittle personally takes his place, flying the lead aircraft. If this mission is going to kill American airmen, Doolittle will be the first to go. April 2nd, 1942, USS Hornet departs San Francisco. Accompanying her is Task Force 16, the carrier USS Enterprise, providing fighter cover, 4 cruisers, 8 destroyers, and 2 fleet oilers. Enterprise will not carry bombers. Her role is to protect Hornet from Japanese attack, while the vulnerable Army bombers sit on Hornet's deck, unable to launch or defend themselves until the mission begins. The task force steams west. Radio silence. Strict blackout conditions. Every man aboard knows they're heading toward Japan, into waters controlled by the Imperial Japanese Navy. If they're detected, if Japanese carriers intercept them, the entire task force could be annihilated. The B-25 crews practice on deck. They walk through engine start procedures. They memorize the deck officer's signals. They calculate and recalculate fuel consumption, range, airspeed, wind correction. They clean their guns. They study maps of Tokyo, maps that show primary targets and secondary targets. Doolittle's aircraft will strike the Shiba petroleum installation and the nearby warehouse district. Other crews will target the Yokosuka Naval Station, the Yokohama dockyards, aircraft factories, steel mills, power plants. These aren't terror bombing raids targeting civilians. These are precision strikes against military and industrial targets, though in 1942 those distinctions will blur. The one modification they cannot practice is the actual launch. There's no way to simulate it. The B-25s sit chalked and chained on Hornet's deck. Starting them risks fire. Taxiing them risks crew being blown overboard by prop wash. They will get one chance, one attempt. Succeed or die. April 13, 1942. The task force refuels from the fleet oilers in heavy seas. Fuel hoses part. One oiler, USS Sabine, nearly collides with a cruiser in the rough water, but the refueling is completed. This is the last chance. From here, the carriers proceed alone toward Japan. April 17, 1942. Evening. The task force is 700 nautical miles east of Tokyo. Doolittle briefs the crews one final time. Launch is scheduled for dawn, April 18th. They will launch at approximately 400 nautical miles from the Japanese coast, strike their targets in daylight, arrive at Chinese airfields after dark, guided by radio beacons. The crews try to sleep. Most can't. They write letters home, letters that will only be delivered if they don't return. They check their equipment. They pray. April 18, 1942. 038 hours local time. USS Enterprise's radar detects a surface contact 42 miles ahead. A Japanese picket boat. The task force has been detected. Admiral William Bull Halsey, commanding Task Force 16 from Enterprise, makes an immediate decision. The cruiser USS Nashville opens fire on the picket boat, sinking it with her 6-inch guns. But the damage is done. The picket boat transmitted a warning before it sank. Tokyo knows American carriers are approaching. Japanese land-based bombers and fighters will be scrambled. Japanese submarines will move to intercept. The task force must withdraw immediately or be destroyed. But the B-25s can't be withdrawn. They're bolted to the deck. They can't be launched and then recovered. The only options are launch now, 650 nautical miles from Japan instead of 400, or abort the entire mission, jettison the bombers into the ocean, and steam for safety. Halsey signals Hornet launch planes. To Colonel Doolittle and his gallant command, good luck and God bless you. Doolittle and his crews are awakened. The news is grim. They're launching immediately, 250 miles farther from Japan than planned. This means 250 additional miles they must fly on already marginal fuel reserves. The probability of reaching China has dropped from slim to nearly impossible. But if they don't launch, the mission is over. Tokyo will never be bombed. The message that America can strike back will never be sent. Every crew volunteers to proceed. 0400 hours. The deck is chaos controlled by discipline. Sailors swarm over the B-25s, removing chocks, pulling engine covers, loading last-minute supplies. The bombers are packed so tightly that there's barely room to walk between them. The first aircraft, Doolittle's, has 467 feet from its wheels to the bow. The last aircraft, number 16 at the aft end of the deck, has perhaps 30 feet of clearance behind its tail before the carrier's island structure. The sea state is appalling. Hornet is taking green water over the bow. Waves crash across the flight deck. The ship is pitching 15 to 20 degrees, rolling 10 degrees side to side. Wind gusts reach 30 knots, but it's shifting, not steady down the deck. This is not launch weather. This is not launch conditions. This is desperation. The crews board their aircraft. Pilots and co-pilots settle into their seats. Bombardiers crawl into the nose. Gunners check their weapons. The remaining 50 calibers that weren't removed to save weight. Navigators spread their charts. 80 men in 16 aircraft about to attempt something that aviation experts have said cannot be done. 0720 hours. Doolittle's aircraft, tail number 422344, begins its engine start sequence. The right engine coughs, catches, roars to life. Black smoke blasts from the exhaust stacks. The left engine starts. The propellers become blurred discs. The noise is overwhelming. Two 1,700 horsepower engines at full power in an enclosed space, bouncing sound off the carrier's island. Behind Doolittle, the second aircraft starts. Then the third. 16 bombers, 32 engines, 54,400 combined horsepower shaking Hornet's deck. The carrier turns into the wind. 30-knot natural wind plus 20 knots of ship speed equals 50 knots of headwind down the deck. That will help. That might make the difference between flying and drowning. The deck officer positions himself at the left side of the deck, forward of Doolittle's bomber. He's Lieutenant Henry Miller, the same Navy pilot who conducted the test flights at Eglin Field. If anyone understands what's required, it's Miller. He watches the bow, watches the ocean, times the swells. What happens in the next 30 seconds will determine whether James Doolittle lives or dies. The physics are brutal and unforgiving. The B-25B weighs 31,000 pounds at this moment, 4,000 pounds over maximum rated takeoff weight. That overweight condition increases stall speed. It increases takeoff distance. It decreases rate of climb. The engines are producing 1,700 horsepower each at 46 inches of manifold pressure, beyond red line, the cylinders hammering at detonation threshold. This power level cannot be sustained. The engines will destroy themselves, but they only need to survive for 90 seconds, 30 seconds of takeoff roll plus 60 seconds of initial climb. The distance available is 467 feet. Under normal conditions, with normal weight from a stationary runway, the B-25B requires approximately 3,000 feet to take off. Doolittle has 1/6 of that distance, but he has advantages: full flaps, providing maximum lift at low speed, a 50-knot headwind, effectively reducing ground speed and increasing airspeed, and most critical, the moving deck. If timed correctly, Doolittle will release brakes just as the carrier reaches the top of a swell. The deck will be angled upward, giving his bomber a boost. Then, as he accelerates down the deck, the carrier will drop into the trough. At the moment his wheels leave the deck, the bow will be falling away beneath him, a free gift of altitude, perhaps 15 feet, perhaps enough to avoid settling into the ocean while the bomber accelerates to flying speed. If timed incorrectly, if he launches in the trough, the deck will be angled downward. The bomber will roll downhill toward a rising bow, and the instant the wheels leave the deck, the aircraft will drop into the back of the next wave. At 31,000 pounds, hitting the water at 70 knots means the fuselage will disintegrate. The crew will die on impact or drown in seconds. Lieutenant Miller knows this. Doolittle knows this. The timing must be perfect. Miller watches the bow rise. The swell passes under the ship. The bow begins to drop. He watches Doolittle, watches the propellers blur into full power, watches the bomber strain against its brakes. The bow drops. Approaches the trough. The next swell is coming. The bow will rise. Now. The checkered flag drops. Doolittle releases the brakes. The B-25 lurches forward, engines shrieking, propeller blast throwing spray and exhaust smoke backward. The bomber accelerates. 30 miles per hour. 40. The deck is rushing beneath the wheels. 50 miles per hour. The bow is rising now, the swell passing underneath. 60 miles per hour. Doolittle can feel the controls coming alive. The ailerons responding, the elevator gaining authority. 70 miles per hour. The bow is at the top of the swell. The deck is angled upward. The bomber is still accelerating but running out of runway. 200 feet left, 100 feet. Doolittle pulls back on the yoke. The nose lifts. The main gear is still rolling, still in contact with the deck. 50 feet of deck remaining. The carrier's bow begins to drop. The main gear breaks contact. The B-25 is flying, but barely. The bomber sags, drops toward the water, the props clearing the wave tops by perhaps 10 feet. Doolittle holds the nose up, bleeding airspeed to gain altitude, a dangerous trade but necessary. The bomber mushes through the air, every rivet straining, the engine screaming at full power. 75 miles per hour. 80. The airspeed increases. The altitude increases. 20 feet, 30 feet, 50 feet. Doolittle begins a shallow climb. He's airborne. He's alive. 1 down. 15 to go. On Hornet's deck, the second bomber moves forward into launch position. Lieutenant Travis Hoover's aircraft, tail number 42292. The same procedure. Engine run-up. Watch the deck officer. Watch the bow. Wait for the flag. The launch sequence continues. Every 2 to 3 minutes, another B-25 thunders down the deck, lifts off, clears the bow by feet or inches. Some launches are clean. Some are terrifying. Lieutenant Ted Lawson's aircraft, number 7, drops off the bow and nearly hits the water before clawing back into the air. Lieutenant Donald Smith's aircraft, number 11, veers left during the takeoff roll. The left main gear running within inches of the deck edge before the bomber straightens and lifts off. But they all make it. Every single bomber launches successfully. 16 aircraft, 80 men, all airborne. It's unprecedented. It should have been impossible. Navy experts had calculated that perhaps 12 aircraft would launch successfully and 4 would crash. Instead, all 16 are flying. The cost. Hornet's deck is scarred with black rubber streaks and propeller marks where the bomber's tails nearly scraped wood. Several aircraft suffered minor damage from prop wash blowing debris. One crew member fell and broke a rib scrambling to his aircraft. But all 16 bombers are westbound, low over the Pacific, heading for Japan. Admiral Halsey turns Task Force 16 east toward safety at flank speed. His job is done. The rest is up to the Army. Doolittle's bomber flies west at 50 feet above the ocean. Behind him, the other 15 aircraft spread out into loose formation, far enough apart to avoid collision but close enough to maintain visual contact. They fly this low to avoid Japanese radar. In 1942, radar technology is primitive. Low-altitude targets are masked by sea return clutter. If the bombers stay down in the wave tops, Japanese radar stations won't detect them until they're already past the coast. But flying at 50 feet over open ocean is exhausting. There's no visual horizon. The gray ocean blends with the gray sky. The pilots fly on instruments, trusting their altimeters and attitude indicators, occasionally glancing outside to verify they're not descending into the water. Every few minutes, a wave top will rise higher than expected, and the bomber will jink upward to avoid it, the crew's stomachs lurching. The fuel gauges are their obsession. Every pilot, every flight engineer watches the needles creep downward. They were launched 250 miles farther from Japan than planned. That's 250 additional miles of fuel consumption. To compensate, they must fly the most fuel-efficient profile possible, lean mixtures, optimal altitude, which they can't do because they must stay low, precise airspeed control. They calculate and recalculate range. With current fuel flow, with projected headwinds over Japan, with the distance to Chinese airfields, do they have enough fuel? The mathematics are marginal. Some crews will make it, some won't. 12-15 hours local time. The Japanese coast appears ahead, a low dark line on the horizon. Doolittle climbs to 1,500 feet. The other bombers follow. This is the approach altitude for the bomb run, low enough to avoid most anti-aircraft fire, high enough to allow the bombs to arm and to give the bombardiers a stable platform. They cross the coast. Below, Japanese civilians look up in shock. American bombers? Here? Impossible. Some wave, thinking these must be Japanese aircraft returning from training. The realization comes too slowly. Air raid sirens begin to wail, but it's too late. The bombers are already overhead. Doolittle's target Tokyo, specifically an industrial area in the Shiba Ward. His bombardier, Lieutenant Henry Potter, has 4 500-pound demolition bombs in the bomb bay. The Mark Twain sight, the 20-cent piece of aluminum, is his only aiming device. It's crude. But at 1,000 feet with the target spread across acres of warehouses and factories, crude is sufficient. Bomb bay doors open, Doolittle calls. Doors open, the bombardier confirms. The target slides into view. Potter makes final adjustments. The bomber is straight and level now, vulnerable, holding course and altitude so the bombs will fall true. Bombs away! The 4 500-pound bombs tumble from the bay. The B-25 lurches upward, suddenly 2,000 pounds lighter. Doolittle doesn't watch the impact. He's already banking away, heading west toward China, every second at low altitude over Tokyo, burning fuel they'll need later. Behind him, the other bombers execute their attacks. Lieutenant Hoover strikes the Yokosuka Naval Arsenal. Lieutenant Bob Gray hits a steel mill and oil refinery at Yokohama. Lieutenant Everett Holstrom bombs the Yokohama dockyards. The bombs fall across Tokyo, Yokohama, Kawasaki. Explosions blossom. Fires ignite. The damage is minimal. These are 16 bombers carrying 4 bombs each, a pinprick compared to the massive firebombing raids that will come later in the war. But the psychological impact is enormous. Tokyo is not safe. The home islands are not invulnerable. American bombers can reach Japan. Japanese fighters scramble, but too late. By the time Mitsubishi A6M0 fighters reach altitude, the B-25s are already departing, low over the water, heading west. A few Japanese fighters give chase, but the Mitchells are faster at low altitude than the Zero can dive. No bombers are shot down over Japan. But the hardest part of the mission is still ahead. The flight to China is a nightmare of navigation and fuel management. The bombers cross the East China Sea in loose formation, then turn southwest toward the Chinese coast. They should have radio navigation beacons guiding them to friendly airfields. Chinese nationalist forces were supposed to activate homing beacons that the bombers could follow in. The beacons are silent. The Chinese received word that the raid had been moved up by a day due to early discovery by the Japanese picket boat. They weren't ready. The airfields aren't prepared. The beacons aren't operating. The American bombers are flying toward China with no navigation aids, in darkness, in worsening weather. By 2,000 hours, it's full dark. The bombers are over China, but where? The terrain below is black. No lights, no visual landmarks. The fuel gauges are approaching empty. Some aircraft are already running on fumes, their engines coughing as the fuel pumps suck air from the bottom of the tanks. Doolittle faces the decision every pilot dreads. He can't find the airfield. He can't see the ground. His fuel is nearly exhausted. He has 3 options: attempt a dead-stick landing in darkness over unknown terrain, attempt a water ditching along the coast, or order the crew to bail out and hope they survive the parachute descent. At 2:13 hours, Doolittle gives the order: prepare to abandon aircraft. The crew checks their parachutes. The bombardier opens the bomb bay, the exit point. One by one, at intervals, the crew jumps into the darkness. Doolittle goes last. He trims the bomber for level flight, sets the autopilot, and steps into the void. 13 of the 16 bombers are abandoned over China. The crews bail out in darkness over mountainous terrain. One bomber ditches in the ocean off the Chinese coast. The crew is rescued by Chinese fishermen. One bomber diverts to the Soviet Union, landing at Vladivostok. The crew is interned for over a year before being quietly released. 15 bombers crash in China or in the ocean. One lands in Soviet territory and is confiscated. None return to friendly airfields, not one. Of the 80 crewmen who launched from Hornet, 3 are killed in crashes or bailouts. 8 are captured by Japanese forces occupying eastern China. 3 of those 8 are executed by the Japanese after show trials. 1 dies of disease in captivity. 4 survive imprisonment and are liberated in 1945. The remaining 69 crewmen evade capture with the help of Chinese civilians and nationalist forces. They're evacuated through Free China to India, then back to the United States. They survive. James Doolittle lands hard in a rice paddy in darkness. He's bruised, disoriented, alive. Chinese villagers find him and, at considerable risk to themselves, hide him from Japanese patrols. Over the following weeks, he's passed through an underground network of Chinese civilians, nationalist soldiers, and Western missionaries who guide him south and west, away from Japanese-occupied territory, toward safety. When he finally reaches American forces in India, Doolittle is convinced he'll face court-martial. He lost all 16 aircraft. He accomplished none of the mission objectives beyond dropping bombs on Tokyo. By any tactical measure, the raid was a failure. Instead, he's awarded the Medal of Honor. The Doolittle Raid, as it becomes known, is a propaganda triumph of staggering proportions. The American public, reeling from months of defeats, is electrified. We bombed Tokyo. We struck back. The Japanese home islands are not invulnerable. Morale soars. Recruiting stations are flooded. War bond sales skyrocket. The Japanese reaction is more complex. On the surface, the raid causes minimal physical damage. A few warehouses burned, a few factories damaged, perhaps 50 civilians killed. But the psychological damage is profound. The Japanese High Command had assured the Emperor that the home islands were protected, that American bombers could not reach Japan. The Doolittle Raid proved them wrong. The Japanese response is swift and brutal. They launched the Zhejiang-Jiangji campaign, a massive offensive into eastern China, targeting the areas where Doolittle's crews landed. The objective is to destroy the Chinese airfields and punish the Chinese civilians who aided the American airmen. Over the following months, Japanese forces kill an estimated 250,000 Chinese civilians in reprisal. Villages are burned. Entire populations are massacred. The Chinese people pay in blood for their assistance to Doolittle's crews. This cost is rarely mentioned in American accounts of the raid, but it's real. The mission succeeded because Chinese civilians risked and often sacrificed their lives to save American airmen. Their courage and their suffering are part of the Doolittle Raid's legacy. The raid also triggers a strategic miscalculation by the Japanese that will change the course of the Pacific War. Convinced that the American bombers must have launched from carriers and determined to prevent another such raid, Admiral Isoroku Yamamoto accelerates plans for the invasion of Midway Island. Capturing Midway will extend Japan's defensive perimeter and force the American carriers into a decisive battle. The result, 5029 a.m. is the Battle of Midway in June 1942, where the United States Navy sinks 4 Japanese aircraft carriers and shifts the balance of naval power in the Pacific. Whether the Doolittle Raid directly caused the Japanese decision to attack Midway is debated by historians. But it's clear that the raid influenced Japanese strategic thinking. reinforcing their perception that American carriers were the primary threat and must be destroyed. The Doolittle Raid succeeded because of engineering, training, and courage in equal measure. The engineering modifications to the B-25B weight reduction, fuel capacity increases, engine tuning were essential. Without them, the bombers would have been too heavy and too short-ranged. But modifications alone weren't enough. The training was critical. The crews practiced short-field takeoffs until they could execute them instinctively. They practiced low-level navigation. They practiced fuel management. When the mission conditions changed, launching 250 miles farther from Japan than planned, the crews adapted because their training had prepared them for contingency planning. The courage is harder to quantify, but no less important. Every man on that mission volunteered knowing the survival odds were poor. They launched from a carrier deck in conditions that should have killed them. They flew into the most heavily defended airspace in the Pacific. They navigated to China in darkness with no navigation aids. They bailed out over mountainous terrain. They evaded capture across hundreds of miles of enemy-occupied territory. 16 aircraft launched. 16 aircraft were lost, but 80 men launched and 69 survived. In a mission where planners expected 50% casualties, achieving 86% survival is extraordinary. The Doolittle Raid also demonstrated that inter-service cooperation, Army and Navy working together, could achieve results neither could accomplish alone. The Navy provided the carrier. The Army provided the bombers and crews. Neither service could have executed this mission independently. This lesson influenced joint operations planning for the rest of the war. On April 21, 1942, President Franklin Roosevelt holds a press conference. Reporters demand to know where the bombers that struck Tokyo came from. Roosevelt smiles and says, "They came from Shangri-La," a reference to the fictional Himalayan paradise in the novel Lost Horizon. The answer is deliberately evasive, but it captures the public imagination. The raid seems impossible, mythical, a feat of magic rather than engineering. The truth remains classified until after the war. USS Hornet's role. The modifications to the B-25s. The training at Eglin Field. All of it secret. The Japanese know American bombers struck Tokyo, but they don't know how. They suspect carriers, but they don't have confirmation. The uncertainty gnaws at them, influences their planning, leads them toward Midway. Doolittle is promoted to Brigadier General and assigned to command the 12th Air Force in North Africa. He continues to fly combat missions throughout the war, eventually commanding the 8th Air Force in Europe. He survives the war and lives until 1993, dying at age 96. He attends reunions of the Doolittle Raiders, the dwindling group of survivors, every year. They toast their fallen comrades with cognac from bottles saved for this purpose, a ritual that continues into the 21st century until the last raiders are too old or too few to continue. The last Doolittle Raider, Staff Sergeant David Thatcher, died in 2016 at age 94. With his death, the Doolittle Raiders passed from living memory into history. But their achievement remains. They proved that American bombers could reach Japan. They proved that inter-service cooperation could work. They proved that with enough engineering ingenuity, enough training, and enough courage, the impossible becomes possible. They said a bomber couldn't launch from a carrier. 80 men did it anyway. If you appreciate these true stories of honor, ingenuity, and survival, please hit the like button to help preserve this history. And make sure you're subscribed so you don't miss the next mission. These stories, these men, deserve to be remembered. Not as propaganda, not as mythology, but as human beings who faced impossible odds and refused to quit. The Doolittle Raid was not a military victory in the conventional sense. 16 bombers dropping 64 bombs on Tokyo didn't change the war's outcome. But it changed something more important. It changed belief. It proved to America that we could fight back. It proved to Japan that they were not invulnerable. And it proved to the world that ordinary men, given the right tools and the right motivation, can accomplish the extraordinary. that lesson remains relevant. The specific tactics of the Doolittle Raid launching medium bombers from carriers were never repeated. But the principle endures. When the situation demands it, when the stakes are high enough, humans will find a way to do what everyone says cannot be done. They'll calculate the physics. They'll modify the equipment. They'll train until the impossible becomes routine. And then they'll strap themselves into an overloaded bomber on a pitching carrier deck 600 miles from enemy territory and fly into history. 80 men, 16 bombers, 467 feet of deck, and the absolute certainty that this mission mattered more than their individual survival. That's the Doolittle Raid. That's what they did. That's why we remember.